Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us, both to those who are joining us live and listening back. I understand it can be difficult to take time to attend webinars such as these. So given how busy everyone's workload is, so we do really appreciate it. We have an exciting morning in store, learning all about threat intelligence and what the biggest risks to your organizations are, how to reduce these risks. And by partnering with CommSec and Sophos, we can help you protect your organizations. So with the speakers this morning, first up after my intro, we have John Hope, who's a senior ICT evangelist at Sophos. Some of you might remember John from speaking at our event back in October. So we're looking forward to hearing from John again. He'll take us through the human-led threat hunting, followed by Bradley Collis, who's a senior global MDR consultant at Sophos, and Bradley will take us through the deliverables around Sophos and take us into a deeper dive on the service offering. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Caoimhe Gouling and I'm the account director at CommSec. So first up, I know we have a mix of new customers and existing clients on with us this morning. So CommSec, we're a dedicated pure play cybersecurity service provider who operate out of our offices here in Dublin. We're in the industry 11 years plus, and for a great number of those years, we've been a platinum partner of Sophos. And what that means for you as our potential customers is that we invest in our people both from a technical and a sales professional point of view, so that we can offer you on the ground Sophos technical knowledge and backed up by the Sophos team and an extensive team. We have a local presence here, Michael Silk, who I think is on the call this morning. So it really is a collaborative approach with CommSec and Sophos. Apart from our platinum partner of Sophos, we have a range of cybersecurity services, and these are categorized into 4 main pillars, which I'll take you through shortly. And I guess in summary about CommSec, our mission is to safeguard yours so that you can look after your organization, and we look after the cybersecurity. So in terms of the CommSec service offerings, the 4 main pillars are: we have a 24/7 security operations centre based here in Dublin. It's manned 24/7. Managed SOC. We provide SIEM services, threat hunting, and incident response. We have another team who are predominantly providing out vulnerability scanning and penetration testing, red and purple team, and then we have professional services. These are both security professional services like digital forensics, data protection officer as a service, CISO as a service, but also their infrastructure professional services who will design, implement, and ongoing support of our technology partners' offerings. The purple there is highlighted, so that, and under our solutions, which is the 4th pillar, we have a range of technical solutions to help protect in the ever-changing threat landscape. So we have, as I said, today we'll be talking to about our managed detection and response offering through Sophos, but also we have the likes of firewalls, zero trust network, multi-factor. So without further ado, I will hand you over to John Hope.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed for that intro. If you bear with me for a second, I will share my screen with you. And let's get ourselves underway. Fantastic. Yeah, so the purpose of this session is really twofold. One is to give you a bit of an update on the threat landscape and some of the changes that we've seen in the way that cyber criminals operate and why that makes human-led threat hunting so highly relevant. Then, as you mentioned, Caoimhe, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Bradley, who's going to talk a bit more about exactly what we do as part of that service and what we deliver. So that's the basic format of the rest of the session. So very quickly, by way of introduction, my name's John Hope. I'm Senior Technology Evangelist here at Sophos. I won't bore with my career history because that's what LinkedIn's for. But I will tell you that I've been at Sophos for quite a long time and enjoyed various different roles, picked up lots of different skills from all the different products and services that we offer, which has been an exciting ride since 2011. That's for sure. It's not really about me, of course. It is about the content that I wanted to deliver to you today, and we're going to start by an observation of the cyber threat landscape. And it's important to understand what's changed out there, because that is the real driver for the change and the need for human-led threat hunting. Rather than me give you my own opinion on what I think is happening out there, I'm actually going to draw on two bits of research that we conduct here at Sophos, the first of which is the State of Ransomware report. This is an independent survey of 3,000 network administrators, budget holders, IT managers, people very much like yourselves. So these were selected for us at random by Vanson Bourne. These organisations, it's worth mentioning up front, are not necessarily Sophos customers. Probably statistically speaking, they aren't. As I said, an independent survey, 3,000 administrators worldwide. We don't ask them what they're doing about cybersecurity in terms of which vendors they align to, but we do want to know what their experiences are like. The opposite side of the fence is the active adversary report. This one is more first-hand evidence. We operate our own incident response services here at Sophos, which gives us exposure into organisations when they're at their worst point, I guess. We can see a lot about cybercriminal tactics and what they've done and how far they can get into an organisation if they're left unimpeded. So that gives us lots of interesting data. We also, of course, manage in excess of 21,000 organisations worldwide in terms of their managed detection and response service, which again gives us lots of insights into some of the nefarious and clever techniques that cyber criminals will use. And also our products also send back telemetry back to base, and we use all of that information to produce the active adversary report, which, like I said, it gives us first-hand evidence of exactly what the cyber criminals are up to. Both of those documents are available free of charge, and I believe they'll be distributed after this call as well. But I'll save you some of the heavy lift for now, but I'll just give you some of the highlights. The first of which is in that State of Ransomware report, of those 3,000 organisations worldwide, 66% of them reported at least one ransomware attempt in the 12 months running up to that survey, which, if it sounds bad, is actually the same statistic as it was last year. So ransomware is and continues to be a major challenge. Of those attacks, 76% involved some successful encryption of data, which is the prime mechanism of any kind of ransomware attack. And that's actually gone up from 65%, which was the previous statistic. And what this tells us is that in the case of defense, most of the organizations here obviously were inadequately defended because cybercriminals shouldn't get as far as encrypting data. But it also tells us as well that the cybercriminals are potentially getting better at what they're doing. And I'll explore some of the reasons behind that as we go through the rest of the session. Now, perhaps the most troubling statistic out of all from that report, from my perspective as a cybersecurity practitioner, is that 46% of organisations paid the ransom. So they felt their best or their only option was to pay the cyber criminals off and hope that they got their data back. This tells us the organisations probably didn't have a good disaster recovery plan, maybe didn't have decent backups, and that was their best choice. It's not a great option, to be totally honest. It's a poor return on investment in terms of actually paying the ransom off. You will not typically get all of your data back. In fact, the average is about 60% of your data. But you don't choose the format, you don't choose which data that is, so you could get meaningless junk back. And it's also potentially funding the long-term attacks of ransomware. You are effectively encouraging more people into that, I'm going to call it an industry, and you're perpetuating the problem by doing so. So something to avoid if you possibly can. And then last but not least, the average cost of ransomware is now an eye-watering $1.82 million. If that number looks crazy unrealistic to you, then another way of phrasing that is ransomware can and does consistently put organizations out of business. And cyber criminals are very good at targeting their ransom demands to fit an organisation's ability to pay. They know fine well that hitting Mrs. Miggins' bakery down the road with 3 employees for $1 million demand is a waste of time. So they target it based on your ability to pay. And as I said, it can be a very, very painful experience for a number of reasons. So yeah, it gives you a bit of an idea about the state of cybersecurity in general. And we can also see a little bit about how the cybercriminals actually target their victims. You'll see there's an interesting spread of organizations here, and sectors that are typically underprepared and underprotected are the ones the cybercriminals will gravitate towards. This tells us that, assuming that the cybercriminals' motivations are financial, which in practically every case that is their prime motivation, organizations that are typically weak and underprotected offer the best return on investment. So sectors like education, very poorly protected, typically underfunded, are very popular targets. Conversely, IT and high technology at the right-hand end of the screen there, that is a sector which is typically well prepared, invests heavily in cybersecurity, understands the technology, therefore presents itself as a tough target. So if you look at that spread there, essentially, the more difficult you can make it for the cyber criminals to get into your organization, the less likely you are to become a victim, is the key takeaway from that. So who are the people behind these attacks? The media would have you believe that this is what a cyber criminal looks like. They're almost universally portrayed as hoodie-toting individuals hanging out in mom and pop's basement, operating in isolation. The reality, however, could not be further from the truth. If you look at this graph here and add the numbers together, you will find almost 100% of ransomware is delivered by one of these major criminal gangs. And we know a lot about the structure of these gangs because of this one particular group up here, which is Conti. This is a name that you may well have heard of. They were all over the newspapers and the press in 2021 as the A-game players in ransomware. They were responsible for about 25% of ransomware worldwide in 2021. You'll see, however, that they have had quite a dramatic fall from grace. In 2022, they were responsible for less than 5% of ransomware worldwide, and as an organization, Conti now no longer exists. The reason for that change is because they had a very public disagreement over Ukraine. Without getting overly political, and it's a statement of fact that the Conti gang is headquartered in Russia, and most ransomware gangs, and Conti is no exception, are effectively franchises. In the case of Conti, a large number of the so-called affiliates were actually Ukrainians. And when Conti announced very publicly that they were going to support Russia's activities in the Ukraine using cyber means, perhaps unsurprisingly, the Ukrainian contingent were not particularly on board with that message. And what happened is Conti fell apart. It fell apart very publicly, and a large volume of data spilled out, which told us a lot about the structure of a cybercrime gang. So you need to be thinking less hoodie-toting individual in a basement and more like line manager, HR department, monthly targets, monthly salaries, basically everything you find in a legitimate business, except obviously the way that they're going about making their money is different. The reason that this is relevant is it's absolutely vital that we do not underestimate the capabilities of cyber criminal. They have huge resources, both financial and human, at their disposal to carry out their activities. In the case of humans in particular, this has led to a quite significant shift in the mechanisms associated with ransomware attacks. In a world where we are increasingly relying on AI, you may have one of those little voice assistants. I'm not going to name it in case it springs to life in your living room. You may well be using tools like Copilot and that kind of thing to help with your day-to-day tasks. And that's kind of the general direction of travel, but the cyber criminals are actually going in the opposite direction. They have huge human resources at their disposal and actually are finding it more effective to utilize human beings or hands-on keyboard attacks. The reason this is important is that it changes the way that we have to defend an organization. Traditionally, software attacks would have been defended with technology and software-based defenses. And that, in the relative scheme of things, is a reasonably straightforward thing to do. Code is consistently behaving the same way. It behaves the same way on every execution, which means in relative terms, it's relatively easy to contain it. However, human beings are notoriously unpredictable, and this changes the landscape completely because humans have this ability to problem solve, adjust their tools, their techniques, try different approaches, and it means that it's really challenging for cybersecurity vendors like Sophos and our peers and to actually defend against these kind of attacks. So you might be wondering as well, why are those statistics so bad? And I've just illustrated one of those reasons because of the use of human beings in these forms of attacks. But there are a number of things that are happening in the world of cyber all at the same time, which means we have this almost perfect wave of ransomware. Those three challenges are, first of all, that the malware and the code itself is getting typically more sophisticated. Remember, we saw that 76% of those attacks now result in successful encryption. One of the reasons behind that is as a perhaps unintended side effect of coalescing into criminal gangs, means that human beings typically learn better collectively. It's why we have education establishments, for example. And it means that the cyber criminals can actually share ideas, share code, either internally and in some cases externally with other gangs. And it means that generally speaking, their ability to execute that malicious content is actually improving. Then you've got the human element. What I'm referring to here is the human element of an attack. In many cases, where the cyber criminals can't necessarily penetrate using solely technology means, they will leverage attacks against a human being. I'm talking about things like phishing and general social engineering. And we kind of make it easy for the cyber criminals in some respects. So one free takeaway is just consider what you're sharing online, because every scrap of intel that you share out there can and probably will at some point be used against your organization. It's euphemistically referred to as OSINT, or open source intelligence, in the cyber criminal community. This is basically using tools like social media to be able to work out what their victims are interested in, what their activities might be, where they might be located, all that kind of thing, so that they can leverage phishing attacks that fit the victim's reality almost perfectly. So we don't see so many attacks these days, certainly not the successful attacks that involve things like, oh, your rich uncle that you've never heard of has passed away and he's left you $1 million, click here, or leave us your bank details. It's now more like, you play golf at this golf club, they have an event on this day, and if you want to be fed, you should probably fill out this form about your dietary requirements. In those kind of scenarios where it fits your reality so perfectly, why wouldn't you click on those links? And this is a challenge that we now face because of really, I guess, oversharing in the digital domain. And then last but not least, and this is the area that we're really going to focus on for the duration of this session, is we've seen a dramatic shift by the cyber criminals not to necessarily leverage their own malicious software. I'm talking about things like viruses and malware here. I'm talking instead about the cyber criminals actually utilizing legitimate IT business tools against organizations. So where technology can defend against illegitimate software, what it can't do so well is distinguish between, for example, a legitimate user carrying out legitimate activities versus the cyber criminals impersonating or brute forcing their way into an account and then leveraging the tools at their disposal against the organization. So we see frequently cyber criminals leveraging tools like RDP and tools like PowerShell, for example, to distribute their malicious content. And again, this is a point where it's really difficult for technology to work out the difference between legitimate use and illegitimate use, and it presents a really, really significant challenge. If I was to summarize all of those things, I guess technology on its own simply isn't enough to protect against most of these threats. So how do we combat them? Well, it requires a level of human intuition to fight against human-driven attacks. And it's important to make sure that we capture the attacks using the early warning signs. Very rarely, if ever, do we see attacks that involve going straight to ransomware immediately with no precursory signs. And in fact, in as many as 83% of the cases that we investigate from an incident response perspective, there are telltale signs the organization was about to have a really bad day. Everything from getting into the organization to escalating privileges, migrating around the environment using lateral movement, to exfiltrating data from the organization before eventually encrypting the files they can get a hold of. These all leave a trail of breadcrumbs. However, that trail of breadcrumbs is often buried in potentially thousands and thousands of log lines of information. If you think about a typical IT environment, your endpoints, your access points, your switches, your routers, your firewalls, your public cloud, to name but a few things, are all generating thousands and thousands of log lines of information, and the telltale signs that the organization is under attack and that cyber criminals are at play inside the organization are potentially buried in just one or two of those log lines of information. Finding them, however, is significantly challenging. It's hard to interpret them. It's hard to find them in the first place, given that enormous sea of data. And it becomes particularly challenging when most of the attacks that we observe now are actually landing outside of typical business hours. So where we define business hours as 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., which is generous in some cases, then most of the attacks, in fact, 91% of those attacks actually land outside of that time. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, again, without getting too political, most of the attacks come from places that are operating on a different time zone. Let's just phrase it like that. But also the cyber criminals know that organizations are at their weakest when there is nobody watching the information, nobody watching the telemetry. So if you're going to carry out these threat hunts yourself, you need to have skilled expertise to find that information, but it needs to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, because that's when the cyber criminals themselves are operating. They're also getting much quicker as well, which means the window of opportunity to detect these attacks is actually decreasing. We used to measure dwell time, and dwell time, the definition of that is basically from when the cyber criminals first get into an organization to when they carry out their action on objective, which in most cases is to encrypt data and launch ransomware. You'll see now that instead of measuring that time in months, we're now looking more like days. In fact, just a little over 50% of those ransomware attacks, the dwell time is less than 5 days. So that window of opportunity to find the telltale signs and do something about it before the bad stuff really happens, that dwell time is shrinking, and it's shrinking rapidly. So all of these things come together to form a real challenge that means that, first and foremost, of course, we've already learned technology on its own isn't enough. But actually having a bunch of tools to search your own estate doesn't necessarily equip you to be a threat hunter. And it certainly doesn't equip you to be a threat hunter 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is a little bit like me going out to the sports goods shops and buying myself a set of boxing gloves. Having the tools doesn't necessarily equip me for the activity. In this case, putting on gloves doesn't necessarily automatically make me a fighter. Having the tools is one thing, the ability to use them, of course, is something completely different. Another way of phrasing that, I guess, is that we fundamentally believe at Sophos that cybersecurity has become a challenge which is too complex for most organizations to be able to deal with and manage effectively on their own. And that's why we offer our managed detection and response service. So in a moment or two, I'll be handing over to Bradley to explain exactly what's delivered as part of our MDR service. But suffice to say, what we're offering here is access to a team of experts 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We are monitoring your estate, pulling in information, not just from Sophos products, but also a wide range of other third-party products as well, detecting the types of cyber attacks that I've been referring to here, the types of attacks that would otherwise go under the radar and that technology on its own simply cannot prevent. Just before I do hand over to Bradley, just one last thought for you is that the managed service market is growing dramatically here at Sophos. We've seen that this is really hitting the right spot in terms of what customers require, and it's augmenting their abilities, and you can see that by the successful billings and the successful number of customers that we have on board as a result. So this is highly relevant to organizations of all sizes and all geographies, and you can see that based on the figures here that I report. So with that said, I'll leave that thought with you, and Bradley, if you are ready to take over, I will let you explain exactly what you and your colleagues in the MDR team do and how you help keep organizations secure.
Awesome. Cool. Hopefully you can see more pictures of me. So thanks, John. Thanks, guys at CommSec, for setting up this webinar. I'm Bradley. I'm a solutions consultant at Sophos. I've been at Sophos for 10 years. I spent a chunk of that in various different places across the organisation, and I now reside within our global security services division, helping out customers looking at future managed service offerings, and also moonlighting on that incident response service that John alluded to. So helping out customers who haven't got managed security services in place and who are unfortunately looking at the sharp edge of a ransomware attack potentially at a given time. So John's preambled me quite nicely with a good coverage of why managed security services and managed detection response services are realistically nowadays the minimum a company needs to be secure. And we believe at Sophos that we have the most complete solution when it comes down to a managed detection response and a managed security service offering. And the main reason for that is we've been an industry leader in the vast majority of security solutions for decades. So we are an industry leader and a Gartner Magic Quadrant leader for endpoint, and also for firewall. We're a G2 leader for MDR services. And these security solutions are ingested and used by over 500,000 customers globally. So that's not just a really good marketing number. That actually, from a technology standpoint, gives us an amazing footprint of devices and threat intelligence to ingest into our services and build better products and bolster that managed service to be able to deliver the best possible threat intelligence to not only our over 21,000 managed service customers, but also our wider customer base as well. So the MDR service from Sophos, I'll give you a high level, we'll dig a bit deeper and we'll have a look at exactly how the service works and why it's important. But the MDR service from Sophos is effectively an instant SOC, an instant security operations center. Globally, we have over 500 security personnel who operate this service, and they work remotely from 13 different time zones to deliver this service in a way that covers your business 24 hours a day. So for those 24 hours a day, we're looking at signals of interest from systems, we're looking at detections, we're looking at, as John said, those breadcrumbs, those really quite low fidelity detections. And I'm trying to understand the story around them. If we see an event, what's the context of that event? Is there a breach unfolding? Is there something concerning we need to investigate? If you've looked across the wider security market, you will know that managed services and managed detection and response services are 10 a penny. There's 1,000,001 vendors, 1,000,001 vendors doing something cool, but a vast majority of those vendors are going to investigate something and then they're going to tell you about it. They're going to say, hi, Mr. Customer, we've spotted X, Y, and Z. Go and fix it. Which is great. You've been told about it up front. There's a bit of an early warning that something's going on. But that response requirement comes down to you as a customer, which for the vast majority of customers is way too complex and way too big a task to actually be taken on, actually be dealt with. So as part of our MDR service and part of our managed detection and response, we have a capital R when it comes to response. If we identify something, we are going to resolve it. If it's something that needs some input from you guys, we're going to advise on it while we also mitigate as well. And as part of that, we are doing proper human-driven, proper expert-led threat hunting. So as John said, it's all well and good that this system that we have or systems that a customer may have in place is going to generate telemetry for us, is going to generate information. We have experts behind the scenes who are going to be ingesting that data, understanding it, and building out fully featured hunting capabilities to go out into all of our customers and look for these threats, look and understand what the risk is and whether there is something of concern that needs to be remediated. And through that service, if we do see these critical things going on, we're going to deliver incident response as well, included in the cost of the service. So if you as a customer with MDR in place, with everything protected by Sophos, and we spot something critical unfolding, we aren't going to leave it to develop. We aren't going to kick it over to you guys and say, bit big for us, sorry. We're going to jump in. We have a full dedicated incident response team who are going to dive in and help mitigate that. So let's take a step back and build on what John said. The way the cybersecurity market is nowadays, customers have more tools, customers have more complex tools, and the capabilities, either from a person perspective, so a number of personnel, or a knowledge perspective, or just a will perspective to actually manage all of those solutions is very hard to find. So if we think about 5 years ago, pre-lockdown, pre-COVID, pre all the changes that have happened in the landscape recently, you can consider the left-hand side of this diagram as sort of how business networks were run, right? So you had endpoints and servers, you had other network devices, everything was within a nice physical perimeter, maybe guarded by a perimeter firewall. And that was sort of the way of the world. Maybe there was some cloud solutions in place, but a lot of things were on premise. Q 2021 and 2022, and the way that the world detonated and completely changed, everything became distributed. So these users that you had internal with their endpoints went off to their own home office where you had no network control, you had no network protection capabilities. So you had to start building in remote access and VPN and other public cloud assets and build out to solutions like 365 and solutions like Salesforce Cloud and Google G Suite and Google Workspace and all these other external parts of your perimeter that you still have security responsibility for. And as part of that, you've probably built additional security solutions in place. So your endpoints, regardless of whether they're in the office or out of the office, have probably got an endpoint security solution on them. Maybe from Sophos, maybe from Microsoft, maybe from another vendor. your internal Exchange server is probably now in some sort of hybrid mode, or you've migrated to a cloud-based solution when it comes to email. So your email solutions are potentially in multiple different places. You've also had to distribute firewalls, whether that be cloud-based firewalls for public cloud, obviously still local firewalls when you're looking at the actual perimeter contained office, if you still have an office space. And then the world of IoT has exploded as well. So looking around my house, I have light bulbs with IP addresses. We had a major client we were talking to in the food industry, and their fridges were all networked. They all had IP addresses. Anything with an IP can be hacked with enough time, enough willingness, and enough mistakes by the vendor. So NDR and network detection or NTA solutions have come out as well. And this is not potentially a large enterprise, or not necessarily just a large enterprise issue. If you look at small businesses and the way that they were changed by COVID, this is pretty much a template for the vast majority of businesses we talk to. And if you're sitting there as a security admin, you've got potentially 6 or 7 different solutions, maybe from different vendors with different consoles, all throwing different alerts at you to try and understand and try and manage. And doing that is overwhelming, even for the biggest security teams, which is why we come together and try and process the alerts from all of these different disparate solutions in one generalized place and actually understand them together. So we ingest telemetry from endpoint solutions, firewall solutions, email, cloud, NDR. You can see on that list on the left-hand side. The idea here is the vast majority of alerts and data we receive from these is noise. So as John said, looking for those breadcrumbs, looking for those needles in that haystack. If you employed or you ingested this data yourself, maybe you had a SIM in place, so Splunk or Logarithm or other vendors, of course, and you were trying to do this, you would need to understand what is that signal to noise ratio? Which of these billions of alerts potentially you're receiving on a daily basis are of interest? The difficulty there, even if you have a well-tuned SIM and you have a good log processing level in place, is that you're only ever going to see those alerts in a vacuum. So an example I use is a login event. So if John logs onto his laptop, that is going to be one of those billions of events, which you'll see maybe in a few different places. You'll see it on endpoint. You'll see it in your domain environment. So whether you've got an on-premise domain controller or Azure AD or Entra ID, or maybe you've got a Google Workspace authentication methodology in place. That's a completely normal event and something that is going to happen day in, day out across all of your devices. Same with a failed logon. If I see John fail to log on to his device because he gets his password wrong, in a vacuum, that's not interesting. That's not important at all. But if we see around that context that in fact there has been 300 failed logon attempts followed by 1 successful attempt in an exponentially short period of time, we have a context and we have a story there that maybe someone is trying to brute force John's password. Someone has got access to his device, or there's access via IDP to the internet. They've got John's username. They're trying to guess his password. If you build that bigger and you look at that wider spider diagram of places where we have these touch points across the network, we may also see that on the firewall. So we may also see that there is an unauthenticated remote session coming in via your firewall. Or maybe there's a VPN connection coming in from an unknown IP or from an IP that we categorize as malicious. We may also look back across your email and see there was actually a successful phishing attempt against John. So there was a malicious link in an email that the email solution didn't manage to block, that we see part of that telemetry. And we can build out and contextualize and correlate all of this together to understand that John fell afoul of a phishing attack. Someone has been able to gain remote access to his device and is failing to log in, and then they succeed. So we understand there is a breach on John's device. We have the context that it potentially came from a phishing email and there is compromised credentials in play. We can start to build out a response and we can respond to that. And that entire pipeline of from detection through to response and completion for Sophos takes about 38 minutes. If you were looking to do this internally, you'd be looking at 12 to 36 hours to carry this out. In the scale of a cyber threat, that's like saying, well, we're going to leave it 5 years and see what happens. So we respond quickly and we actually initiate response to resolve these threats before they develop into something more. In the case of this attack, this is initial access. this is sort of step 1 or 2 of the cyber kill chain. Where John's talking about those payload deliverables and data extortion and ransomware and data being stolen from your network, that's step 7 or 8. So we want to get into these threats so early that we can neutralize them and contain them before anything has happened. And it's also worth mentioning, if you did have an endpoint, a firewall, email solution in place, there's a good chance you wouldn't have even seen this. So this is all trace level telemetry that is coming in at a system level, which is just so noisy that a human can't analyze it. We build this through our own threat analytics and machine learning models to understand exactly which of this noise is useful. There would be no endpoint detection, there'd be no antivirus or malware detection at this point in time, and that's good. We want to keep it that way. So John alluded that we integrate across a vast majority or a large majority of vendors. This is the current list. I can tell you already I need to update it because we released Cato Networks this week for networked integration. If you have any of these solutions in play, we can work with it. We can ingest data from it. We can take a look at that data and ensure that that is being monitored so you don't have to from a security perspective. Let's take a look an inch deeper and how this all works. So this is something that we've coined as our detection pipeline, and something that we do for, on this slide I've got Veeam, but it could be any of those integrated solutions. So we're taking that signal to noise, we're taking that noise in, and we're ingesting that into our system via a couple of different ways. So for on-premise solutions, so firewalls, Darktrace, Veeam backup and replication or backup and restore, we ingest that data via log collection. So we're taking raw syslog from those devices. If you have something that is cloud managed or has API connectivity, we're pulling in their API data as well. All of that is coming into our platform and is being stored effectively in our highly tuned SIM in the cloud, which we call our data lake within Sophos Central. When we get that data, we know that a large amount of it is noise. So we actually filter out a load of the alerts and events that we know are not security related. So for example, from your Veeam solution, if you had Veeam backup and restore in place, we are going to be filtering out the events in regards to day-to-day tasks being generated. So new backup tasks being triggered, things like that, so that we are left with those high quality alerts and events, which indicate something is going wrong. So from a Veeam perspective, someone is trying to tamper with backups or affect authorization or authentication methods when it comes to backups as well. We then clean the data down, and the reason we do this is when we started doing this and when we worked with the various components of the service in the initial inception of this, the data you receive from various vendors is not equal. So if we allude back to the complexity for you guys to try and administer this, not only have you got 7 different solutions firing alerts at you, the alerts are all completely different and they are just overly complex and can cause snow blindness. So these are 3 different firewall vendors. These are firewall events that we received as part of our managed service. Customer had integrated a firewall. I haven't named them. You can probably have a look through and work out who they are if you look at some of the alerts. But all of these mean different things. And for an analyst to know the ins and outs of every single firewall vendor's alerts and be able to pull out the salient information to be able to actually deal with a threat is almost impossible. So the things we're looking for in here is the severity of a level of a threat. So the top firewall vendor is a threat alert 4. What does that mean? You have to understand what their different threat levels are. What we really want to understand is whether also a firewall has taken action. So if you look at firewall vendor B, that's a severity 7. It's a high severity threat. It's being categorized as a critical severity. But you can see on that middle line, the firewall has allowed that activity. And that's a key thing we're looking for, is where these security solutions have logged or noticed something, but haven't taken action. Because if a security solution hasn't taken action to a threat, there's potentially a wider breach we need to understand on the network and we need to respond to. But to get through all this noise and this snow blindness of alerts, we clean the data down. So we apply this all to a particular schema. We have an internal schema that categorizes and pulls out the important information so we can understand what happened. What exactly was the alert and what was the category? Was it a particular vulnerability? Was there a particular CVE involved? And then what entities were involved, what IP addresses, what usernames, what devices were involved in this. Once we have that data, we can then correlate these together. So we can look where those internal IP addresses come up across our entire alert stack, across all of the telemetry from all of the different security solutions. And we can build out a cluster that pulls all these bits together to give us more context, give us more of an idea. So if we look at a load of Veeam alerts, these are 7 to 1,000 alerts we receive from a Veeam solution. On their own, they don't mean a lot. I mean, it's snow blindness again. So we correlate these down. So we understand that if we actually filter through these alerts and understand what happened in a time frame, there were 3 attempts to delete a backup, which are unsuccessful, and 1 was successful. If we were just looking at raw log and looking at those raw text alerts, that would be almost impossible to understand. The system processes this in a way that an analyst can look at this once we escalate it to them and go, okay, successful backup deletion after an unsuccessful attempt. I have the MITRE techniques. We map all of this to MITRE attack framework. And then we can start to build out a response plan to understand, okay, this backup has been deleted. We know an attacker has got quite far through the cyber kill chain. We need to instigate instant response to jump in, resolve this issue, and mitigate that threat. So we, as a company, if we saw this thing as one of our threat analysts, they would be hitting the big red threat response button. But we're also going to make sure that the customer is fully aware of what's been going on. So we always have a human analyst write up notes for a customer. This isn't just an AI produced nonsense text that we send through to you that you then have to translate. We write this in human readable language. And if there's ever any qualification required, our analysts are always available for a call on the phone or an email to go through and talk about what's been happening in the case. So for this case, for a Veeam backup issue, we investigated 4 detections for Veeam. We had a look and we understood that there was a particular MITRE attack technique involved, T1490. And we saw that there was multiple failed attempts to backup, to delete a backup followed by a successful backup deletion. We then go out and we hunt into the estate and look what's been happening. We saw there were particular administrators involved in this. And we also understood that one of those administrators was performing additional techniques, so was doing network scanning. This helps us, again, build out a bigger case. We aren't just laser focused on this Veeam attack that's happened. We will need to understand the wider breach. So in this case, that administrator is performing additional tasks. So we kicked that admin off the network. We kicked both those malicious admins off the network. We then, because the attack hadn't proceeded more than that, want to collaborate with the customer. So discuss with you to understand the context of, was this expected? Was it just an administrator failing 4 times? Was there more going on? And if there is some advice on how to mitigate that and get through that as well. If we look at a couple more real life use cases, I'm just cognizant of time as well to make sure we have some time for some Q&A. This was a use case not even using Sophos endpoint. So as an MDR vendor, of course, we'd love you to use Sophos. We think our endpoint is the best, and there's enough analysts out there also echoing our thoughts. But if you are a Microsoft customer, someone who's invested heavily into E3 or E5 or Business Premium, and that is the security vendor of choice that you want to use for your endpoint solution, fine. We'll integrate with Microsoft. We'll pull in graph security data. We'll pull in Azure Sentinel data, and we'll use that endpoint as the front line. We would ask you to put a second opinion scanner on there. So put our XDR sensor on there as well to collect all of those needles in that haystack. But we'll work with Microsoft. So in this case, Microsoft alerted us to a command and control event, a C2 event. So an attacker's tools on a device calling home to that attacker at a malicious IP address. We identified that and we correlated it with all those events we saw within our data lake, within all the telemetry the customer has sent us, to see if there was more impact here. So our analysts jumped in within a matter of minutes and saw that Defender had blocked that command and control event, which is great. That's brilliant. We love it when third-party solutions actually do what they're paid for. But we wanted to understand whether there was more going on to build a root cause analysis. So we isolated that device so that we had more time to investigate and to contain that threat. We could see that this had come from a phishing attempt again. We had a look, we pulled that phishing email into our threat research team, into Sophos Labs, and decompiled it, to understand where did this come from, where there are IP addresses that need to be added to block lists in the customer's estate, and build out more of a root cause analysis so that the customer has some lessons learned from this. The second one I'll cover is something that came from our firewall integration as well. So this was a Sophos endpoint customer using MDR Complete, using our full MDR solution, but also integrating firewalls with us as well. So Cisco Meraki in this case. So in this case, an attacker was scanning external IP addresses to look for vulnerabilities, look for publicly facing applications with known vulnerabilities. They were able to identify an externally vulnerable port and try to inject code into that. The Meraki saw this happening, but did not block it. So we knew that there was a potential breach on the network because the Meraki had seen malicious traffic and had done nothing about it. There was no endpoint detections, no wider detection to call across the estate. That qualified alert from a firewall, we generated a case for this. And our MDR team dug into that investigation to work out which internal device was involved. In this case, the internal device was not protected by Sophos. I think it was a Linux server. It didn't have Sophos installed on it. So we understood that the attack came from malicious IP due to our own threat intelligence and threat research. And we were able to advise the customer on which vulnerability, which CVE was used as part of this. So the feedback to the customer was, make sure that device is protected by Sophos, make sure that that application is patched so it's no longer vulnerable, and also block that known malicious IP address in your perimeter firewall. Probably have a good hard word with Cisco as to why that wasn't blocked in the first place. These are things that administrators would love to do. We appreciate that. We know that in a perfect world with an unlimited security budget, you would have a team of people in-house who is able to go through everything that's happening and review it and understand the context and how risky that is to the estate and actually deal with it. But we also know in the current climate, that's just not feasible. Having 5 or 6 people working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week and being able to financially fund that is mostly impossible for the vast majority of customers. So that's why we've built this service in a way that we think, honestly, is the bare minimum a customer should be looking at if they're looking at monitoring multiple security things. And from an internal network perspective, having a well thought out and well formed security solution involving a next gen endpoint, next gen firewall, and then a team monitoring and managing that 24 hours a day is almost imperative, because it really is, as John showed you with those stats earlier, a case of not if you are going to be attacked, but realistically it is when, because attackers are going to attack you regardless of business sector or size or financial profits, because they will tailor that attack to you guys. So building on that, building on what John said, a third of ransomware attacks start with an exploited unpatched vulnerability. And there's something we've built out at Sophos in a relationship with Tenable called Sophos Managed Risk. So this builds upon our MDR service. We already have 21,000 MDR customers out there experiencing and benefiting from 24 hours a day coverage from our MDR team. But what a customer, the issue for a customer nowadays is, how do you know what to protect? So of course you hopefully have an asset of internal assets that need to be protected and monitored and have sort of telemetry investigated and things like that. But what does your external attack surface look like? Do you have open ports to the internet? Have developers started sharing cloud resources or other dev apps or web apps out via your externally facing servers or externally facing assets? So we've partnered with Tenable, so an industry leader in managed risk and in attack surface monitoring, to build out a solution that builds upon the Sophos MDR service to help us and help you understand, first of all, what is your attack surface? If someone was scanning your network or looking at your external perimeter, what are they going to see? Are you aware of everything that is available? Are you aware of all the ports that are open to the internet? Are you aware of your hosts that are accessible? And then secondly, also to understand which of those are vulnerable. So as part of this, we want to, or we are, the service is
Sorry
going
there, Bradley. I'm sorry to cut across you. Just in the interest of time, we've run way over, and I know the managed risk nearly deserves nearly deserves a session in its own right.
Definitely.
So if it's okay with you, we might just pause there.
Sure. Yeah, no problem at all.
Wow, really some super insights. Blinded by the snow, I like that one, I have to say, with all the noise. So really great presentations there this morning. I hope our listeners out there have found it as scary and I guess also as reassuring as I have, you know. So I am just going to check there if there are any questions. I am conscious we've run out of time slightly, but are there any questions? Give me a look there to see if there's any questions coming in here now. Okay.
I can see a few in the
Okay.
list.
Yep. Sorry. Apologies there. So, sir, it's not really coming through for me there now.
I've got them. Do you want me to? Shall I ask them and Brad, you can pick them up?
Sounds
Or
good.
Yeah.
I'll pick them up if it's relevant. Okay, so first of all, our organisation is interested in MDR, but where do we begin? Can you walk us through the steps it takes to get started with an MDR integration or implementation?
Sure. I mean, I can start on that from, I guess, a partner perspective. The first things you do is to reach out to within CommSec, and we will work with you. So we will work with the local team here, Michael. It really is relatively straightforward. There's a couple of options, whether you are an existing Sophos customer already or whether Sophos is new to you. Then we discuss around the options about the Sophos MDR essentials or complete. That really comes down to whether you have an in-house team. And really after that, we work very closely with Bradley's MDR team, and the guys in Sophos have made it very easy for us to get going on this service. So once commercials are agreed, it is really very straightforward. From a technical point of view, there is not a whole lot in terms of, there's a couple of things we would have to iron out, as you know, whether you're Sophos end-to-end, whether it's Sophos at the endpoint, whether you're a Microsoft Defender customer. So there's a couple of nuances, but really Sophos do the majority of the heavy lifting. We work with you here locally on the ground for any maybe infrastructure changes or that you need, but really and truly reach out to us and we can discuss. Bradley or John, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, so I think you've covered it perfectly there. I mean, it is very, very easy to get started. It's effectively, if you're a non-Sophos customer and you're moving to Sophos, it's one agent to deploy across your devices, and then it's just looking at what you're wanting to integrate, which obviously the guys at CommSec can help on as well. If you do have an incredibly complex deployment and it's something that we just need to spend some time to get into place, there's options that you have with Sophos to bring in our professional services as team as well, in collaboration with CommSec, to make sure that we really do iron out the nitty-gritty of the particular estate and the particular setup you guys have got, to make sure that on day one you're hitting the ground running and we've got full coverage.
Okay, next up we've got, I'm confused about
the next question. I'm confused about the different.
Well, you found them. You go.
Yeah, I did. Confused about the different endpoint security solutions. Can you explain the key differences between MDR, EDR, and XDR?
Do you want me to do that one?
Yeah, sure, John. Take it away.
Okay, cool. Okay, so XDR and EDR are both essentially tools that allow an end user organization to conduct their own threat hunts. EDR is essentially just taking telemetry from endpoints and servers. XDR, or extended detection and response, will take telemetry from other places as well. So typically things like your firewalls. We offer that as an option, but like I said, it does then rely on the end user having the ability to utilize those tools, which may or may not be the case. For any organization that cannot commit to running 24/7 by 365, MDR comes into play. because then we are conducting the threat hunts, and we use our own XDR tool, and our MDR analysts have a bunch of other resources at their disposal as well that allow them to conduct and disrupt where we find those malicious activities on the end user's behalf. So that's a bit of a difference. In a single sentence, EDR, XDR, you do it yourself. MDR, it's outsourced or semi-outsourced to Sophos.
That's quite possibly the most succinct answer I've ever heard on those differences. Thank you, John. Next one, I see you have a good uptake for MDR. Which industries have adopted it most? I guess maybe Bradley, could you take that from, I suppose, your team? Yeah.
It's a fair cross section, to be honest. Obviously, historically, MDR services or any sorts of managed security services have been cost prohibitive to sectors where obviously there's traditionally less investment, so education, maybe healthcare. There's obviously been significant breaches in the last few years. If you look at the NHS in the UK and some of the other health services, especially across Europe, that have been breached and have had obviously significant ransomware.
Our own health service was breached here also.
Yeah. So investments are being made, and there are, especially across vendors like Sophos, who are trying to always do the right thing when it comes to supporting small businesses and sectors which have been historically ignored by some of the larger security vendors. It's becoming more feasible for those sorts of customers to outsource into. But we really do cover a full cross section. John may have, I'm not sure if you've got fairly good stats about our spread, but it is everything from sort of local government through to healthcare, through to education, through to public sector, through to other things like
yeah, I mean, from I guess
like
I might add to that, in the Irish market particularly, what we're seeing is local and central government. We would have logistics is a growing area, and then probably like a range of cross the likes of software development, and I guess what we've seen in utilities is a growing section. So what we've seen certainly in the last maybe 6 to 12 months is customers who would have felt that they could probably manage it okay in-house, are now realizing that really EDR it's just too complex. It's too complex, and they're engaging with an MDR service to partners like ourselves with you guys.
Yep.
Look, that is the questions that I can see coming in. Listen, I really appreciate everybody who's staying the call. I appreciate we went a little over, but it is a really. You can look at potentially doing the managed risk section separately. I do appreciate, Bradley, we cut you there mid-flow, but thanks again. Thanks again, John and Bradley from Sophos. And for those of you who want access or had to drop before this recording is finished, we will be in touch and send out the recording to you. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks everyone.
Take care.